It's been an extraordinarily difficult election season for obvious reasons. First, of course, because we knew, or many of us knew, what we were facing, and we failed to vanquish a very dangerous foe. Secondly, of course, that foe is going to be back in power, and we know exactly what the Republicans are capable of. There are many, many factors that went into these election results, and all of them need to be taken under consideration. But unfortunately, a lot of Democrats have been jumping into the fray, not taking those things into account, but instead doing what a lot of Democrats often do, blaming each other, blaming the party. This is obviously counterproductive, but it's also just misguided. But let's start with those who are throwing most of the blame, and let's look at their incredibly faulty reasoning. First up, of course, is longtime Democratic operative James Carville, who has been going around saying that Democrats have been carrying the stench of defund the police for, I don't know, 4 years now, even though I literally can't think of one elected Democrat who ever uttered that phrase. He had a lot of other unhelpful things to say in this clip from an interview with Christian Amanpour.
I'll give Harris credit. She didn't use any of the woke language, but this is like trying to wash clothes that's got smoke all over them. You can't get the stench out. And you could ask Senators Manchin, Senator Casey, Senator Brown, Senator Tessa, if they don't think that defund the police had an adverse effect on attitudes toward the Democratic Party. My God, you're right. It was so stupid, no one wanted to bring it up, 3 years later, but the residue of it just stuck with us. It's going to take more than one cycle to get this stench off of the Democratic Party, and it's a stench of the highest order, let me tell you.
I mean, where to start? First of all, it's so stupid. Nobody want to bring it up again. Nobody did. I mean, again, you're talking about a handful of Democrats who, by the way, had a case to be made. This was in the wake of George Floyd's murder at the hands of Derek Chauvin, just to remind you of what was going on at the time. But to compare a couple of people saying defund the police outside of the party machine to, I don't know, the stench perhaps of fascism is just absolutely absurd on its face. And then unfortunately Carville wasn't finished. He had more to say about Harris's failure to separate herself from the Biden administration of which she is part.
There are a lot of things that are just popular that Democrats are for, and they're popular with every kind of Democrat in the country. They also happen to be popular with independents and even some Republicans. And we should run on a popular thing. A popular thing was not continuing the Biden administration. That was clearly not what people wanted. I think he's a great guy, but people didn't want more of that, and that's what we gave him.
Yeah, people didn't want more jobs. People didn't want lower inflation, gas prices. People didn't want a responsible president taking us out of the absolute horrors of a global pandemic and the ensuing economic collapse. And I don't know, somebody who snatched democracy from the jaws of autocracy. Remember those days? Yeah. So that's bad enough. But then we have Senator Bernie Sanders, who really needs a new act. Here he is blaming Democrats for not reaching out to the white working class.
If you're an average working person out there, do you really think that the Democratic Party is going to the mats, taking on powerful special interests and fighting for you? I think the overwhelming answer is no, and that is what has got to change. When you have millions and millions of people working for starvation wages, you got to speak to that reality.
You know what needs to change? Yeah, Vermont, you need to pick a different senator next time around. Here's a not exhaustive list of initiatives the Harris campaign and the Democratic Party support paid sick leave, paid family and medical leave, universal child care, universal pre-K, tax increases on corporations and the rich, the expanded child tax credit, raising the minimum wage. You know which party is against all of those things and has fought valiantly to make sure that none of them gets passed? Yes, the Republican Party, the party now in power. So then we have Chris Murphy, who just doesn't seem to be able to find a crisis he can't manufacture. He claims that Election Day was a cataclysm for Democrats. Before I show you this clip, I want to acknowledge that losing this election was cataclysmic, but not for the reasons Murphy would have you believe. Check this out.
I think Election Day was a cataclysm for Democrats. I don't think there's any way to sugarcoat it. Listen, there's a path back to an electoral majority, a House majority. It's very difficult in the Senate right now. We have an effective cap of 52 seats, and you saw this massive demographic movement away from Democrats amongst some of our core constituencies. I think this is a red alert moment for the party. I think we're beyond small adjustments, and I don't think I have all the answers. I don't think anybody has all the answers.
Well, I don't know. I guess run a fascist because that worked for the Republicans. Is that the kind of thing we're talking about? And when you say cataclysmic, again, when all the votes are counted, we're going to find out that Kamala Harris lost this election by less than 2 percentage points, and Donald Trump probably didn't break 50%. So I'm not entirely sure what he's talking about, because clearly he is not looking at the external factors that absolutely need to be investigated in order for us to turn things around in the future. And then, of course, we have a lot of people engaging in anticipatory obedience, which, according to expert on fascism Timothy Snyder, is rule number one: do not obey in advance. One thing this is how I characterize what President Biden did today by inviting Donald Trump into the Oval Office again. I find that disgraceful. President Biden ran his campaign, and in supporting Kamala Harris's campaign, alerting us to the dangers of Donald's fascism, bringing him into the Oval Office, shaking that man's hand is to normalize him, just as corporate media have been doing for almost 10 years now. I was absolutely ashamed that happened. Then we have Chuck Schumer speaking to the Senate about tough elections and getting back to work without fantasies of rigged outcomes. Just look at this clip.
I hope that after last week, we can put to rest the fantasy of stolen elections and rigged outcomes. 4 years ago, the losing side refused to accept the will of the people, and it led to a violent insurrection at the U.S. Capitol. This year, we will not go down that dark and violent path.
I mean, I'm practically rendered speechless, but I should probably say something, right? How can you say that, given the fact that the person who incited the insurrection is the person you are handing our democracy over to? You are not a serious person if you cannot make that connection. All right, before we continue, I'm going to take a beat and calm down and just ask you to do me a favor. It would be very generous of you if you could subscribe to our channel. It doesn't cost anything, and we're really trying to grow. So thank you so much for your support. Next, we have to look at the voting public. Understandably, a lot of people on the left have been bemoaning the fact that we may well have overestimated our fellow American citizens, because, again, tens of millions of them voted for a fascist, a cruel, vicious man who has betrayed our country, who's an adjudicated rapist and business fraud and convicted felon. So it's very difficult not to think that there's something missing from a lot of people. So here is something that Aaron Rupar posted on Twitter. I think one of the most difficult reckonings of this election is that the incentives we thought inspired voting choices, a better life for your family and future for your community, may not be as decisive as the desire to dominate and inflict cruelty on outgroups. Explanations that don't grapple with this point generally read to me like liberal wish casting. It's not that I disagree entirely with this point of view. I share some of those sentiments. And it's true that there are people who would rather have people do worse than they do than to succeed more in their own lives. That's kind of human nature to one degree or another. But there are many, many, many other factors we need to consider before we condemn outright tens of millions of Americans because we need to figure out a way through this um, so we can get more people on the same page about what it means to live in a liberal democracy. But unfortunately, we're going to have to go through a lot of suffering before we can get to that point. Then, of course, we have the fact that America has one of the least educated electorates, and I mean educated about elections and educated about their civic responsibilities than any other developed country. The day after the election, one of the top Google searches was, "Did Joe Biden drop out?" I mean, Joe Biden dropped out of the election 3 months before, and was replaced by Vice President Kamala Harris. On November 5th, were there a lot of people who actually thought that they were going to the polls to vote either for Donald Trump or Joe Biden? That's very disturbing. Also, another very popular Google search was how to change my vote. This was very popular in swing states that Donald won, indicating a degree of buyer's remorse. However, that's not how it works. You cannot change your vote after the fact. This has been a problem for a very long time now. We do not teach our children civics in a way that makes it relevant to their lives. We do not teach media literacy and we do not teach critical thinking, all of which makes us more susceptible to things like Russian interference in our elections. Um, Phony videos were disseminated, which were designed to swing voters away from Vice President Harris. Here is a video about how early voting may have been impacted by those Russian videos.
Good morning. The U.S. intelligence community is sounding off on back-to-back Moscow-manufactured videos spreading lies about early voting, issuing a rare warning to Americans. 3 top government agencies have assessed that Russian influence actors created this fabricated video shared across social media, falsely claiming that a group of Haitians illegally voted for Vice President Kamala Harris in Georgia. The goal? To raise unfounded questions about the integrity of the U.S. election and stoke divisions among Americans.
We also had numerous bomb threats in battleground states on election day, which were also alleged to have originated from Russia. Check out this video.
These precincts will be open late. Earlier today, we heard from Secretary Brad Raffensperger, and he confirmed that this location would be open late following delays from those non-credible bomb threats that came in. Fulton County officials say none of the other precincts were evacuated, and voting at other locations was not impacted.
Outside of these brief interruptions, Election Day has been quiet with minimal issues reported, and we remain prepared to address any misinformation or additional disruptions to ensure a smooth experience for all voters today.
I don't really know how anybody can say with absolute confidence that bomb threats at polling sites did not have any impact on the election in swing states. Also, what seems to be left out of this conversation is that the vast majority of bomb threats were in heavily blue districts. Getting back to the Russian videos we talked about a minute ago, the FBI, the Director of National Intelligence, and the top cybersecurity agency issued a rare joint statement warning that these videos were false and of Russian origin. Then, of course, Russia blatantly claims that they helped Donald win the election. Monday morning, a Russian intelligence officer made the following comment in an interview with the Moscow newspaper Kommersant. He said, the election campaign is over. To achieve success in the election, Donald Trump relied on certain forces to which he has corresponding obligations. As a responsible person, he will be obliged to fulfill them. That seems pretty clear to me. But look, taking all of this together, there's context here. 2024 was a year in which there were massive trends away from incumbent governments. Everywhere, voters voted out the party in power, regardless of the ideology or the history. They continue to feel dissatisfaction that has not been properly addressed due to the global pandemic through which we all suffered. This has happened in the United Kingdom, in Botswana, in India, in North Macedonia, in South Korea, and in South Africa, as well as Poland and Argentina last year. But there's also this happening in America. Americans don't vote in sufficient numbers. Turnout for this year's election is projected to be around 65%. 65%. With about 158 million ballots counted already. That means that about 87 million eligible voters didn't bother to turn out. 87 million Americans didn't think that the franchise was a right worth exercising. This is a critical problem. If there's any silver lining here, is that there are untapped resources. There are many Americans who can possibly be swayed to participate in our democracy. As far as I'm concerned, that's a project that should be at the top of the Democrats' list going forward. Once again, it would be incredible if you could subscribe to our channel. We're really trying to grow. It doesn't cost anything, and it's going to help us become an independent media outlet to be reckoned with. Thank you.